President Biden said failing to support Ukraine would be a Christmas gift to Putin. Can we say that Putin got this gift?
Right now, Putin has gotten a Christmas gift from Congress. For months now, aid to Ukraine has been delayed by political infighting in Congress and dysfunction in the American political system. Support for Ukraine was really one of the rare bipartisan success stories in American politics, especially for the last almost 2 years now. But now we're starting to see that Ukraine is falling victim to the same partisanship and political dysfunction that has plagued American politics for a very long time. There are some reasons to be optimistic going into 2024, but the overall picture, things are going to get a lot more difficult for Americans who want to get Ukraine the support that it needs.
Will they get more difficult in January?
Yes. January is when Congress will come back into session. The first order of business, ideally, would be to make sure that a bipartisan deal for changes to immigration policy and support for Ukraine and other foreign aid, that a deal like that gets done. Unfortunately, Congress is going to have a lot on its plate in January. Not only are there several presidential primaries and caucuses in Iowa and New Hampshire, but there are going to be government shutdown crises. The first deadline comes in mid-January, the second in early February. There's going to be a whole host of things that are pressuring Congress and taking up valuable time to try to get Ukraine the aid that it needs. All in the meanwhile, Ukraine needs to get this aid as soon as possible. Ammunition is starting to run out, and a signal is being sent to Putin especially, but also to other strongmen around the world, that maybe they can wait out the United States. Maybe we are too divided to take action when we need to.
So how can Russia use this situation?
Well, in the very short term, it means that Russia is going to be able to escalate its attacks on Ukraine, both on the front line and its attacks on Ukrainian cities. We know that they've been stockpiling missiles and drones to do more air raids on cities like Kyiv, Zaporizhia, Lviv, and we're starting to see that already. Ukraine is not going to have as many air defenses as it needs to protect against these attacks. That means that because Congress hasn't gotten Ukraine the aid it needs, we might see more civilians dying in Ukraine who did not need to die. Also, at the same time, Ukrainian soldiers are reporting that they're starting to run out of ammunition on the front line. They're having to ration ammo. And that is especially in part because Congress hasn't taken action. All of these things are things that Russia and Vladimir Putin can exploit.
And as far as I understand, it's not only about ammunition, it's about Ukraine's economy as well.
Exactly. So there are a couple of different things that the United States and other Western allies do to support Ukraine. Of course, one of the most important from the United States is military aid, but just as important is economic support, budgetary aid, and humanitarian assistance. One of the big lessons that the United States has learned from previous attempts to support foreign governments, especially during wartime, is that it's very valuable to have a government that is functioning, that is able to combat corruption, provide good aid that is received. Budgetary support for the Ukrainian government to be able to keep paying salaries and pensions, keep functioning, to keep the economy afloat, that's very important to making sure that all of the other aid that is provided to Ukraine, it's cared for, it's used properly, and that the country is able to function right. Now that, hopefully, if a deal comes through in Congress, that kind of support will continue to be provided. But already, even those members of the Republican Party who do support continued military aid to Ukraine, they're starting to get more skeptical of budgetary assistance. They're asking questions like, why should we, Americans, be paying for pensions in Ukraine and propping up small businesses? And it's an easy talking point, but all of this stuff matters.
But does it reflect the public opinion, what ordinary Americans think about continuing military assistance for Ukraine?
Now, the majority of American voters do still support continued military assistance to Ukraine, but they are increasingly susceptible to arguments against supporting Ukraine, especially Republican voters and self-identified MAGA voters. Arguments that Ukraine is taking money away from the United States, things that should be spent, better spent at home. These arguments do have some sway for Republican voters especially. There was a recent interview where Republican Senator J.D. Vance, he falsely claimed that Congress is looking at cutting Social Security in America to get Ukraine economic aid. That is a false claim. That's not something that's being looked at, but that kind of argument is very persuasive to some voters who feel like Ukraine is stealing from them.
Does your organization, Razom for Ukraine, see any decrease in the donations in terms of ongoing discussion in Congress and all we just talked about?
Well, we haven't seen a change in the last couple of months as the United States is having an overall pause in aid to Ukraine. But of course, there has been a difference in the number of donations that came in the first year of the invasion, when we saw truly record-breaking donations that came to Razom. Razom was one of the organizations that, when Americans wanted to get aid to Ukraine quickly and effectively, they turned to organizations like Razom. Now, of course, as we're in the second and soon third year of this war, public interest starts to decrease, and other issues come and take up attention. So we are seeing some of that decrease, but you really see these core supporters from across the country, people who support for Ukraine, getting Ukraine the help that it needs. It remains one of the most important issues to them, and they're in it for the long haul.
Speaking of migration issue, what solutions are possible now?
Well, as we come into January, what we're likely to see is some kind of a deal and compromise struck between Republicans and Democrats, and especially as the White House gets increasingly involved in these negotiations, some of the things that we're looking at seeing are some of the main priorities for MAGA Republicans, especially in a bill called H.R. 2 that they had passed. And these are changes to American immigration policy, things like curbing the number of asylum claims that can be accepted, expediting the removal of detained migrants or migrants who have been released into the United States. These are changes that are deeply divisive in America. They're going to be deeply unpopular with many Democrats and progressives especially, who think that this is a return to inhumane Trump-era immigration policies. And these are changes that will not go far enough for those on the far right, who want to see a really dramatic overhaul of the American immigration system. There may be some kind of a compromise that they strike here, but it's not going to please everybody.
So to sum it up, the situation will get much more complicated in January.
When we come into January, support for Ukraine is going to be difficult, more difficult than it's ever been before to get done in the United States, but there are reasons for hope. There have been promising comments from the negotiators who say we're committed to making sure that this gets done, and there remains intense support for getting Ukraine the help it needs. Even among those members of Congress who are holding up aid and pushing for these immigration policy changes, they are still saying we have to help Ukraine, we have to get this kind of a deal done. Unfortunately, it means that there's going to be a delay in the meantime, and Ukrainians will suffer for that delay.